Gyomei versus Akaza is a topic that I'm no stranger to, and in fact is something I covered an extremely long time ago now, all the way back in 2023. However, just because I made a video on this doesn't mean I agree with everything I said in that video, and my channel was very young at the time, and just being quite frank, I was very ignorant of a lot of interpretations and nuances of the series back then that I now know about today, and my conclusion on this fight is drastically different than it was 2 years ago. Gyomei, the Stone Pillar and strongest Hashira versus Akaza Upper Moon 3 is pretty complicated, and it seemed the consensus on this a few years ago was Akaza was the favorite, but is that actually the truth? And does Gyomei actually stand a chance against someone like Akaza himself? Akaza, being a demon so powerful he was able to kill Rengoku and take on Mark Yu and Mark Tanjiro at the same time, and even would have won that battle if Tanjiro didn't unlock his selfless state, is one of the most popular characters in Demon Slayer and honestly one of the strongest. He has a wide arsenal of techniques that could be effective against Gyomei, the least of which being Disorder, which left Rengoku severely maimed, Annihilation type, which pierced through Rengoku's solar plexus, air type, and ability for Akaza to fight at a range, and these are all things that could be threatening to Gyomei. Not to mention Akaza's signature ability, his Compass Needle, which would amplify his attack speed and prowess in close quarters combat. Could Gyomei actually deal with this diverse arsenal that Akaza has and have a chance at winning as well? Akaza, being a character that has infinite stamina because he's a demon, needs to be beheaded and or stalemated until the sun comes out, and if anyone fits the criteria to possibly overcome Akaza, it is Gyomei. By this point to the community, it's no secret that Gyomei is the strongest Hashira. In Kokushibo's eyes, he compliments Gyomei, pretty just blatantly says he's a stronger combatant than Sanemi. Inosuke seems to think Gyomei is the strongest Hashira. Tanjiro notes his smell is different than the other Hashira in direct reference to Inosuke's power statement. And finally, two other Hashira in the fanbook, Muichiro and Mitsuri, call him the strongest, and this is even back when Tengen was in the core and healthy, as they make comments on him in this same little section of the fanbook. It should be extremely clear he is the cream of the crop when it comes to the Demon Slayers, and he is the strongest, without a shadow of a doubt. I shouldn't even have to address this, but I do want to rebuke this one claim that people commonly spew out, that the author said no Hashira can beat Upper Moons 1 through 3, and this just isn't true. I wish I had more to say about this, but that's it. It's just not true. It's made up. So this is definitely a fight that can happen, and I think the best place to start to get our answer to this question, could Gyomei take down Akaza, is to analyze the Kokushibo fight. A sort of odd place I want to start here is from what Sanemi does against Kokushibo, which I know seems a bit weird, but trust me, it's relevant to the topic at hand. Sanemi initially performs pretty well against Kokushibo, but it's made very clear after about a chapter that Kokushibo is massively holding back his power. Kokushibo notes even while he's suppressed, Sanemi keeps up with his techniques. In response, Kokushibo decides that he wants to try harder against Sanemi and starts ramping up his attack speed until he unleashes his moon-breathing 6th form. This is an extremely important scene in relation to Gyomei and has two main interpretations. The first interpretation is that Kokushibo blitzed Sanemi, and the second being that he just massively outpaced Sanemi here. We see the 6th form is a large AoE attack, but earlier in the fight, Sanemi had no issue evading large AoE attacks with his speed, so AoE isn't really a counter-argument to this being a speed feat for Kokushibo. Anyways, we see on panel that Sanemi raises his sword in defense and says he can't blink, and one mistake in the tip of his sword and he's dead. The next panel, when the 6th form is unleashed, Sanemi has his sword in the exact same position and ultimately survives this attack. Him surviving this could mean that he did react slightly to save himself from being killed, and just means that Kokushibo massively outpaced him here. But you could also interpret this scene that Sanemi doesn't change the angle or placement of his sword from the previous panel, and thus he was blitzed and was simply wrong about dying, as him surviving doesn't mean he did successfully react, and could just mean he was wrong about how much damage he could take and not die, Keep in mind, Tsunemi has probably never been this hurt from an attack in his entire life. We see how shocked he is on panel after this happens, so it's entirely possible he thought he would die, and he was just able to survive off his mastery of breathing by coagulating his muscles and blood. Either way, we need to acknowledge that Gyomei's reaction speed is actually greater than Tsunemi's. And the main reason I bring up the interpretations of how Tsunemi dealt with that attack is it dictates how impressive you think Gyomei's reaction speed is. Either way you think, it doesn't change the scaling for the video, but if you think Tsunemi did react to this attack, it just makes Gyomei even more impressive. Tsunemi pretty consistently throughout the fight is struggling to react to Longsword Kokushibo even from a distance, with Gyomei being able to defend himself properly and not take any serious damage, and even reacts quicker than Tsunemi to save his life when Kokushibo initially brings out the longsword. This is the most blatant instance of Gyomei's reaction speed being better than Tsunemi's. And yes, both combatants are marked here, but if we take away the marks, assuming there's an equal amp for both parties, this should be also applicable to their base forms. But I know there's going to be someone that says,
Gyomei is stronger in base form, so his mark should amplify his power to a greater degree than Tsunemi.
And I thought of that too, but even while marked, both parties are able to fight in perfect sync due to their training in the Hashira training arc, which, keep in mind, all occurred in their base form, so that would mean their speed is still relative enough for them to practice combos they train together and not get desynced. Kokushibo even compliments this flat out, saying, in a battle of this speed, they cooperate. So Gyomei's mark being stronger, while a possibility, isn't something that's even noticeable in regular combat or enough to even desync their speeds. And if you really need evidence of this, we see a panel right here where Tsunemi knows that Gyomei's attack is coming from behind him, and the timing is still perfect. Gyomei having faster reaction time is just consistent with him being the strongest Hashira. I don't really see this as being anything contentious. And since Serious Kokushibo needed a breathing form to blitz and or outpace Tsunemi, whichever one you want to say, we can safely assume he would at least need a breathing form to do the same to base form Gyomei. Because when Kokushibo gets serious here and starts ramping up his attack, we see from Tsunemi's point of view he can still actually perceive it. So a moon breathing form from Kokushibo should be the bare minimum speed that you would need to even hit Gyomei, because it's not until the actual form comes out that Tsunemi gets blitzed and or outpaced, whatever you think. We clearly see he still sees the projectiles coming and is reacting even though he's struggling. And this is going to be important for later, so just remember this point. The reason all this is important is that if we recall back to the Upper Moon meeting, Kokushibo is able to perception blitz Akaza without using any notable moon breathing, which is just a worse reaction feat than Tsunemi, who could at least track Kokushibo temporarily as he was ramping up, and also was dealing with a breathing form. I've seen it argued that Kokushibo used a ranged moon breathing attack here on Akaza, but that's not shown on panel, and even if it was, Akaza very simply wasn't able to track the moon breathing anyways, given by his reaction. An explanation of why we don't see Kokushibo on panel is because this is the author's way of showing high-speed movement. We have scenes of characters not appearing on panel, like when Tsunemi goes to blind his brother. He's shown not to be in view of the panel, despite him having to be in this hallway logically. Like, where else would he go? It's not like he jumped out the window and jumped back in to blind Genya here. He's clearly still in this hallway. It's just the author's way of showing and communicating, okay, this character's moving extremely fast, especially when it's in comparison to a party that's much slower. In this instance, it's Genya, and in the instance with Akaza, it's Akaza himself. We see after Akaza's hand is cut off, Kokushibo standing facing him, which would just make it consistent that Akaza couldn't perceive his movement flatly. And perhaps more importantly, this also tells us that Kokushibo came directly at him. It's not like he sideswiped him, then came back and stood in front of him. That doesn't even really make sense. The only way to really interpret this is he blitzed Akaza and just stopped right in front of him. The counter-argument to this is Akaza didn't have his compass needle activated, and that's why he wasn't able to react. However, the compass needle only increases his attack speed based on how much fighting spirit someone has via his magnetism. If you want more details on this, I will link a compass needle explained video in the comments or description, but TLDR, it doesn't affect Akaza's visual perception, which is what Kokushibo blitzed here. What we can gather from all this is Tsunemi has better reaction speed in base form than Akaza. and Gyomei has even better reaction speed than that. And since reaction speed is pretty consistently a lot faster than combat speed and attack speed, this should mean Akaza's attack speed wouldn't be able to even touch Gyomei. You might then say, well, Akaza has his compass, which makes his attack speed abnormally high without really affecting his reaction time. But to even threaten base Gyomei, these compass enhanced attacks would need to be at least moon breathing level in speed, which is a callback to what we were talking about earlier. And this just doesn't really work. Akaza isn't as fast as Kokushibo's moon breathing. This doesn't work for a multitude of reasons, and the primary reason being that Akaza's not even as fast as Doma, since he refuses to challenge him to blood combat despite him hating him, backtalking Muzan when Doma surpassed him. And if Akaza was as fast as Doma, he would have no issue beating up Doma and replacing him. You might say, well, Doma's abilities are just faster and stronger, and that's what prevents Akaza from beating him. If that's the case, then that should just mean Kokushibo is faster and stronger than Doma himself. Otherwise, Doma would have surpassed Kokushibo, because it's noted that Doma was rising the ranks. He started as upper rank 6, and then climbed all the way to upper rank 2, but he still has not surpassed Kokushibo. So even in his base form, I don't see anything that Akaza could do to Gyomei that Gyomei couldn't easily react to and counter. Not to mention, Gyomei also has a ranged weapon, which is something that no other Demon Slayer really has the luxury of besides Mitsuri, which is an especially hard counter to Akaza, who excels in close quarters combat. Not to mention, Akaza is also an extremely aggressive fighter in CQC, and this is even worse for him, as if he gets in close to Gyomei, I see no reason why Gyomei wouldn't have the speed to easily counter Akaza. Tanjiro, while marked at the start of the Infinity Castle, was at least fast enough to match and counter pretty much all of Akaza's techniques and not take any serious damage, with the only main damage he took being recoil from Akaza's power advantage. One that I'm not so sure Akaza would have over Gyomei even in base form, which ultimately led Akaza to trying to disarm Tanjiro to actually damage him. This is barring Akaza's final form Chaotic Afterglow, obviously, but this is still really impressive stuff for Tanjiro. Akaza also just goes for the weapon in character because it's also something he does against Giyu, even when he has Giyu on the ropes. This is something he simply won't be able to do to Gyomei, as Gyomei's weapon is straight up so durable. Kokushibo was unable to even cut it. So if Akaza tries to break Gyomei's chain like he did Giyu's weapon or something, it's just simply not going to work, and could potentially get him in a tight scenario like it was with Kokushibo when he was shocked that he couldn't break it either. As for Tanjiro, I don't think I need to explain why Gyomei is stronger than marked Tanjiro at the start of the Infinity Castle, as this Tanjiro is more of a rival to base form Giyu, if anything, and Akaza, while completely serious and bloodlusted, literally cannot damage this Tanjiro with his attacks without disarming him, which simply is not an option against Gyomei. Keep in mind, in an earlier chapter, Akaza has noted that he remembers Tanjiro's face and he literally wants to spill his guts. So he has no reason to be holding back on Tanjiro here, and that's displayed pretty consistently with him being drawn without a mouth, as this shows he is bloodlusted to kill Tanjiro. Now I really want to stress this, Tanjiro literally takes no damage from any of Akaza's attacks besides spitting up blood from defending from a few, which isn't really direct damage from Akaza, it's more like recoil from defense. Gyomei should have no issues attacking faster than this Tanjiro and deflecting anything coming his way, even in his base form. Another line of scaling that's pretty consistent with this is the fact that Mark Giyu is able to perfectly match Akaza's speed, and this marked Giyu is able to hit Akaza with mutual strikes. Since Gyomei is the strongest Hashira, obviously Gyomei marked is stronger than Giyu marked. This should mean marked Gyomei should have even less difficulty reacting to Akaza, as he should be able to even in his base form, but now he has the mark, and his mark form should have superior attack speed to mark Giyu, who can tag Akaza with mutual strikes. Abilities like Disorder seem scary, yes, but Gyomei was able to react to full power Muzan with his Stone Skin technique to nullify this attack completely, and this was just in base form. And I think by the time Akaza gets to the point where he wants to try Afterglow or Annihilation type, the fight will already be settled with Gyomei as the winner, especially since Akaza has shown in character if he's unable to damage somebody, he just will go for their weapon, as he does for Tanjiro multiple times, and also Giyu when he breaks his blade. This will simply fail if he tries it against Gyomei and could probably get him killed. Not to mention he will have a very hard time even getting up close to Gyomei without getting tagged. And if you even want to throw in the head regeneration for Akaza, it shouldn't be a big deal for Gyomei. He could just behead him over and over until the sun comes out, assuming they're fighting in like a field or something. If it's in the Infinity Castle and he just regens his head forever, I guess Gyomei has no win con. If you want to be extremely conservative, I guess you could say Akaza could take the win against base Gyomei by maybe outlasting him, even though Gyomei should have a distinct stat advantage, and by just the nature that you have to defeat demons, which is by blitzing them and beheading them, which to be fair would be easier for Gyomei since he has a ball and chain to attack at a range, it's not just a sword. But it's hard for me to say that Akaza has any realistic chance at winning against any form of Gyomei after his base form. Felt no need to mention the Red Blade or See-Through World, as if given access to these abilities, the fight is a complete obliteration in Gyomei's favor, but at the very least, Gyomei marked should have a pretty easy time with Akaza, if not his base form alone.